As fans of football, it is pretty much in our nature to over-exaggerate the abilities of our favourite players. And while this does generate more topics of conversation, it also inevitably means that the more beloved a certain player is, the more the likelihood of him becoming overrated. And though that's far from a direct correlation, when we get deeper into this list, specifically number 3, you'll see just what I mean. But before any of that, please remember what overrated actually means. If a player is overrated, they are considered to be better than they really are. That's the definition. And as you can see, at no point does it say that the player is bad. They're just not as good as a lot of people consider them to be. So I reiterate, not bad. Understood? Let's be honest, probably not. Either way, it. Here are 7 world-class footballers with 1 overrated trait. Let's roll on. Number 7, CR7, penalties. So as of recording, Ronaldo has taken a total of 190 penalties during his career, successfully dispatching 161 of them, which gives him a conversion rate of 84.7%. That is incredible, and while very few can match his consistency from the spot, and practically no one who's taken a similar amount, let's talk about his actual technique. He very rarely hits the corners or side netting, usually relies on the keeper to go the wrong way. The stop-start thing he used to do was bullshit, and he barely ever aims for top bins. And look, this may just be a personal preference, but I personally prefer someone who offers something completely different, like Bruno's hop, skip and jump tech, someone like Harry Kane who almost always hits the side netting, or even someone like Alan Shearer back in the day who hit that rocket into the roof of the net. And as for someone like CR, his just look ordinary. Very successful while being ordinary, but ordinary nonetheless. Also, he knocked England out twice. So, twat. Now, it may be worth to note that if I was making this list like 16 years ago, I probably would have posted it on MySpace. Search it up, kids. But also, I'd probably have put free kicks as CR7's most overrated trait. But since people have very much caught on to just how inconsistent he is, I decided to mirror Ronnie's movements over the years and move closer to goal for his entry on the list, with the free kicks one instead going to number 6, Roberto Carlos, free kicks. Greatest free kick of all time? Possibly. In fact, I'd argue it's up there as one of the greatest goals of all time, period. But here's the thing, as astonishingly brilliant that was, I do think this tiny tough tackling tree trunk fight, tank toe punters, twirling torpedo in Le Tournoi has somewhat inflated his free kick reputation, because while he has scored quite a few of them in his career, saying that they came far and in between would actually be somewhat of an understatement. And if you also want to expand the horizons a little bit, his set piece deliveries weren't really great either. So yeah, while he still has one of the greatest free kick highlight reels of all time, Roberto Carlos, unlike his overall game, just wasn't very consistent from dead ball situations. And speaking of consistency, number 5, Robin van Persie, consistency. So ever since he hung him up and the era of the number cruncher slowly ushered in, Didier Drogba's lack of performances to his peak prolific and productive potential is pretty prominent amongst both the press and public, while Van Persie's proportionately poor records have practically been in the periphery of the pair's perceptions of the player. Though in truth, that's not really fair. You see, one of the reasons Arsene Wenger didn't mind offloading RVP to his biggest rival was due to his inconsistency. That, combined with the fact that Van Persie was knocking on the door of 30 around that time, probably made Mr. Wenger think he didn't have much to worry about. And while we all know how that panned out, you can't really blame the man for thinking like that. Because you see, in the 11 years RVP spent in England, he passed 20 league goals and 30 in all competitions on just 2 occasions. In fact, he finished 8 of those 11 seasons with less than 15 goals in the league. And bear in mind that bar the first 2 or 3 years at Arsenal, he was basically the go-to goal getter in every team he was in. Though granted, with RVP it was more due to his injury woes and less to do with him being prolific, which is why I titled the trait as consistency and not something like efficiency or goal scoring. Besides, at least he did win the Premier League in one of the seasons he did pass 20 goals, not to mention also delivering when it mattered most. Unlike Number 4, Luis Suarez, big game displays. I've got a bone to pick with this guy, and possibly some flesh too. So Thierry Henry is one of my favourite players of all time, and despite being the best player in his team in one of the UCL finals, while lifting the trophy in the other, the fact that he's always mentioned in conversations regarding big game bottlers, and f***ing Nutty Norbert with the nasty nibbling gnashes here is never noticed just isn't on, okay? Yeah, I know, that's a lot of N's. Shame for him I didn't use his favourite N-word. And look, granted he does have a better record than Henry in finals, but finals aren't the only big games. Like, I'm sorry, but when Liverpool came back against them at Anfield, poor old Leo got all the stick for supposedly disappearing, whereas in truth, he was actually decent. It's this guy here you should be really mad at. And to be fair, by that point this was pretty much the norm in the UCL knockouts, as he'd been pantsed by the likes of Atletico Madrid, Juventus and Roma in the last 3 consecutive seasons leading up to that. And the one time they even made it through a tough predicament in that competition, he was still quiet as a mouse. Well, quiet as a rat. And basically got completely carried by an inspirational performance from Neymar. Well, apart from that one time when he fell over with no living thing within 2-mile radius of him and cried for a penalty, clearly taking inspiration from the wrong side of Neymar's game. And to put the icing on the cake before he bites into it, you remember that greatest individual Premier League season ever? Bro, never mind the top 4, you know how many of his goals came against the top half of the table? 9. That's not even 30%. And never mind the bottom half, you know how many of his 31 goals came against the bottom quarter? 16. Yep, more than 51% of those 31 goals came against the worst 5 teams in the league, and about 131% of that 51% against Norwich alone. And let's not forget that Chelsea game. You know which one. So it's now been 10 years of Stevie G being mercilessly slaughtered by rival fans for something which, well, judging from the lack of coherence in the comments section, most of you probably do every 10 minutes every day. But what did you do that day, mate? Answer: apart from carry out a deep hour-and-a-half long inspection on the contents of John Obi Mikel's right pocket, yes, the guy from the podcast, that too was playing at centre-back that day. Fucking nothing. Even Iago Aspas was more memorable than him, and he was just looking for his way home. So yeah, greatest striker of his generation? Yeah, get in the mix. Big game player? Get in the bin. Number 3, Ronaldinho, dribbling. Now hold on. Suck a dick. Look, believe it or not, Ronaldinho is one of my personal favourites too, and probably more so than any player ever. He makes you forget about goals, assists, trophies or anything stats related, and just makes you appreciate how talented some of these guys are. The man was something special. However, here's a genuine question, and please answer this honestly. How many of you have actually seen full 90-minute games featuring Ronaldinho? Because you see, Dino was at Barcelona during a time where my interest in Spanish football was probably at its peak. And honestly, most of the time he used to get the ball, he'd just turn, do like 2 dummies, and then pass it back or sideways. Or stop the ball, think of solutions, and then try something outrageous, almost hoping it comes off. That was the majority of his game. But the difference is when it did come off, he was immortalized in these video compilations we all love to just sit back and admire. But when it didn't come off, it was nothing really of note, because that was almost always the case. And yes, I'm well aware that dribblers lose the ball more often than probably any other player, but unlike the true goated dribblers like Messi and Maradona, who almost always was still carrying the ball forward even when having not yet gone past their man, Ronaldinho was a lot more stop-start than that, and therefore when he did eventually lose the ball, it became even more frustrating and at times quite costly too. And listen, in a lot of ways none of this really is all that surprising. His style of dribbling was going to lead him to take more risks than the likes of Messi and Maradona, but that also doesn't change the fact that in terms of pure efficiency, he just isn't on the level of those guys. But speaking of his dribbling style, by the way, please note that there is a huge distinction between dribbling and skills. Because while he's undoubtedly the best I've ever seen when it comes to purely producing flicks and tricks, when it comes to, again, being an efficient dribbler who can skip past almost anyone from almost any position or predicament, and is also continually progressing play whenever he's on the ball, comparing him to the likes of Messi, Maradona, or even his compatriots like Garrincha and Pele, I do think it's going a little overboard. For me, he's just in the category below. Make no mistake though, when I say these things, I am somewhat taking consistency into account. Cause on his day, this guy was as good as anyone in history. And when he was in tune, he was honestly capable of pretty much twisting any world level defender from that time inside out. Case in point. Number 2, Sergio Ramos. Defending. Of all the entries on this list, this one's probably the most difficult to explain. In any event, I shall try. So take Edison for a current example. Right now, he is the first choice keeper for the best team in the world. Yet, keeping the goal isn't actually really his strong suit. It's just that his overall game suits his team's vision of football down to a T, and therefore, there probably isn't any other keeper in the world that can do that particular job for that particular team. Now, a similar argument can actually be applied to Sergio Ramos and his defending, but admittedly to a significantly lesser extent, because without a doubt, Sergio Ramos at his peak and probably even still now was a world-class defender, and when he eventually matured was constantly among the best in the world in his position. But this is what you have to remember: this man is consistently rated among the best defenders to have ever played the game. And well, let's focus strictly on defending and only talk relative to the GOAT level. Because while these things did happen a lot less frequently as he got older and we moved into the 3P era, Sergio Ramos for a big portion of his career was very prone to errors, made consistent rash decisions, lacked positional discipline, has been torn apart many times in his younger days, especially when playing fullback, cost his teams countless times over the years due to all this, as well as, of course, his notorious temperament issues. One thing that actually didn't change as he got older. But I repeat, he was still world class and consistently among the best in the world for many years. And he can only really be considered overrated if we focus solely on his defensive capabilities and rank them among other defenders in that GOAT category. For example, Paolo Maldini, Franz Beckenbauer, Franco Baresi, Bobby Moore, and even his former teammates like Fabio Cannavaro and Carlos Puyol. As far as pure defensive ability, Ramos can't really chat to any of them. But of course, possibly more so in the modern game than ever before, even for defenders, it's not all about defending. And when you combine El Capitano's defensive capabilities with his major honors, big game displays, ability on the ball, goal scoring record and leadership qualities, then yes, for me, without a shadow of a doubt, he's among the all-time greats. Honourable mention, Steven Gerrard, passing. In terms of all-round play, possibly the greatest English midfielder of his generation. But I do feel his passing was only consistently effective when he played with pace up front. He just didn't seem to possess as broad of a range of passing as other world-level midfielders around that time. And if we're really honest, sometimes it did seem like it was just a case of Hollywood and inshallah. Either way, since I did aim to just keep this to one entry per trait, Stevie G is out. And instead, this particular trait would go to number 1, Lionel Messi, passing. And here we go again. And listen, I'm not even saying this to just plug my other stuff, but seriously, just go and watch any of these videos. They provide the full explanation, and hopefully they'll give you a better understanding of where I'm coming from. But let's be honest, probably not. And that is that. Agree or disagree? Beats indifference. Once again, don't forget to like and share. Let me know if there are overrated traits from world-class players that didn't feature on my list. And of course, please do subscribe. Till next time, keep rolling.